everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host. Today, we're going to be talking about equal origins, equality, equity, and the Gender Equity Index. Before we get started, this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode, is sponsored by the members of the ChocolateLife. You can go to the homepage of the ChocolateLife. This is it right now. And if you're not a member, you can click on the join button. There's always a free membership tier. But if you do have the financial resources, I do appreciate you becoming a monthly or annual member, and options are listed on that page. And as always, no matter where you might be watching, whether it's on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, you can go to the live chat on YouTube, you can go to the comments on LinkedIn and Facebook, and you can comment anytime, ask me a question, ask me for a clarification, provide your own interpretation of what it is that goes on, your own ideas, whatever. Get them in the comments. I will get them up on screen, and I will interact with them, give you my opinion, ask the question if I possibly can. So this is your opportunity to participate live in what it is that's going on here today. And so for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like this episode, I produce a post. And this is the post for today's episode. All right, so equality, equity, and equal origins. And this post is a run of show. It's going to give you an idea about what it is that I'm going to talk about, and in the order that I'm going to talk about it. This is one of the longest posts that I've written in a very, very long period of time. And I just want to make sure that I do a little framing of this. I am not going to read verbatim from this, very, very little of that, because it would be boring. And what I've written is sort of structural support. Well, it's not sort of structural report, it is structural report. I want to show to you that I've done the homework on this one. Right? So first I want to start out that this episode is a little bit unusual because it came as a request, or the idea for this episode came as a request from a ChocolateLife member, right, who wrote me an email about 10 days ago who said, "Hey Clay, I saw this," was an email that I was being forwarded, and wanted to ask if you know anything about it. I checked their website, and it seems they created a tool to check their equality on farms. I find the sponsors trustworthy, and I think it was created more by the coffee conglomerates. But I was obviously invited for cocoa, but it seems to me they want us to give them information about the farms we work with. Is it just me, or is this a way to fish for strategic information? So I have been aware of equal origins for quite some time. The notion of gender equity in cocoa and coffee is at the forefront of many organizations' efforts. I mean, there is a group, WINC, W-I-N-C-C, Women in Cocoa and Chocolate. I believe it's Cocoa and Chocolate, not Chocolate and Cocoa. That is their focus. And gender equity has been something that has been talked about by many, many, many people. So I'm familiar with the concept, right? And here is the link to the Equal Origins website. So here it is, and we'll come back to this over the course of the episode. But here's what I want to say. Why am I doing this? Okay. Number one is I have done similar kinds of deep dives into the reporting by many companies. Tony's Chocolonely. I did one recently on the merger, not partnership, but the merger between Uncommon and Silva Cacao, and how that's going to change their transparency reporting. Annually, I've done reviews on the chocolate scorecard and what they do say and what they don't say and what the implications are, how they report what it is that they're reporting. And not just what they're reporting, but how they report it. I am an independent person. I don't have a stake in any of them in terms financially. Right. And so what I can do is I can look at these things, look at the reports and the claims being made from an outside point of view. Right. What I am not saying here, and I want to make this very, very clear, what I'm not saying here is that the people who are doing this work are bad people or that they're lying. Right. That is not anything that I am going to even come close to suggesting, because I don't believe that at all. Right? I believe these people believe in what it is that they're doing, how they are doing, and how they're talking about it, right? However, the reporting is from an internal basis. Again, there's no independent third party who's taking a look at what they're doing for completeness, consistency, and stuff like that. That's what I'm doing. And so I'm going to be looking at the report called The Decade of Progress And I'm going to be looking at the website, and I'm going to be using the same approaches that I use when I'm looking at the chocolate scorecard, or looking at Tony's Chocolate Lonely, or looking at the Uncommon Cacao Transparency Reports. I'm going to use the same approach across all of those things. So I just want to let you know that's what I'm doing, right? I also want to say that, again, the notion or the importance of equity, right, is something that I firmly believe in, that I will get into, because I think it's important to start from definitions. The difference between equality and equity and how it shows up, important to understand before we go into the discussion, and what that means, right? And then I'm going to go into some analysis of what's on the website and what's in the report, because I think that what I'm trying to help you do, as somebody who is interested in chocolate, interested in cocoa, interested in the notion of equity, interested in the notion of transparency and reporting, visibility and reporting, that how do you go about taking a look at these things, right? That's really, really important. How do you go about looking at these reports and saying, okay, can I take what it is that is being reported here, right, as 100% factual? Right? Or I'll just leave it there, right? Are they reporting? Are they reporting fully and accurately? Is probably the best point about it. And this is something I do want to say. So I've read the decade report and extracted from the report elements that I thought were interesting and put together an article, which I shared with some people. But then I took the step for doing that work of checking it. So I have an LLM that is trained on me. Right? And what I did is I said, here's what it is that I have written. And it said, hey, you missed this, you overstated your case here, you made a bunch of mistakes, X and Y and Z, right? And so I was able to use the LLM to fact check my own work. And it turns out that this was really important because I had gotten some things out of order. Some things were unsubstantiated. I was making claims that I couldn't substantiate. And so fact checking my own work was really important. I don't have an editorial staff. I'm not big enough to be able to pay for an editorial staff. If I had a person who was a subject matter expert who could do those things for me, I would gladly pay the person to do that. But I am using my own tools to fact check my own work, which turns out to be really, really important. Number one is there are far fewer spelling mistakes, far fewer grammar mistakes. There are I won't say there are none, but there are fewer. But when it comes to logical gaps, forgotten something, or I got something out of order, I was able to take care of all of those. And I continue to do the fact checking. So I left this yesterday and I came back to it this morning and I read it and I said, can we substantiate this? Blah, blah, blah. So I was able to add some more things to that. So here's what's going on. Okay? So let's move away from the Equal Origins homepage for a second and talk about some things. So the first one of which is understanding about the difference between equality and equity. And this is what it is that I'm showing here. So equality is about the sameness of treatment. Everybody gets the same rules, the same resources, the same rights. They're applied to everybody identically, right? The measure of success is the input. So we are going to say everybody gets access, the same access to all of these things. And so we have been able to demonstrate equality by the input of what it is that we're doing, not the output of what it is that's doing. So equity is about the fairness given different starting positions. So if you give identical treatment to people in unequal circumstances, that can still produce unfair results. So you need to treat people differently. The measure of success is the outcome, right? Or at least the fairness of the chance of the outcome. And there's a very famous cartoon which is associated with this, right? Which is equality is everybody gets to stand on the same size box, right? No matter how tall they are. And in this particular case, it's a baseball game, right? The father, right, is easily over the height of the fence. The older son is barely over and the smaller son can't see anything. They're in the same size boxes. However, equity is you put the father on the ground, you put the older son in one box, and the father gives the younger child a second box so they can see what's going on. So that's a simple way to think about equality and equity, just right, just as a starting point. So equity in this context, meaning the Gender Equity Index, what Equal Origins is doing, isn't a new concept. In law, it's ancient, and it goes back to Aristotle, if not further back. And there's a book called Ethics and the Limits of Philosophy, where there's an argument about the difference between ethics and morality. And this becomes important, right, in my context, my context, because I think of ethics as social or societal expectations, and morality as our own internalization, what I do with the ethics. So, for example, right, you may think that fair trade is ethical. That what it says is you, the farmer, are not being paid enough. And so if you join our program, what we're going to do is we're going to arrange for you to get more money as long as you accede to our guidelines. And the challenge with that is, in my feeling, or in my perspective, is that the cooperative who signs up for fair trade is being asked to accept the morality of the organization. You should do this because we think it's good. You should do this because we think it's good. And yet the organization, in this case, fair trade, does not guarantee the outcome. So, for example, not all cocoa that is grown under fair trade terms is sold under fair trade terms, which means that maybe it's not a good deal for the cooperative, right? If what they do is they can't sell all their cocoa and earn the premium associated with it. So that's one way of thinking about ethics. Right? The morality would be, take a guy like Sean Eskenazi. Right? Sean has said, I'm going to buy your cocoa on fair trade terms. So I'm going to pay the fair trade minimum plus the premium, no matter what. And then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to pay you a profit share based on how much money we made selling the chocolate we made from your cocoa. And so that's an internalization of the fair trade ethic to some extent. Right? But the morality of it is based entirely in Sean's approach to things. And this has become, it's really, really important to understand this distinction. And I do go on to that a little bit more, right? And I talk a little bit more about the graphic, and I do point out, right, just historically, I didn't draw this. I asked Gemini to draw it, and I asked him to do it in the style of Charles Barsotti. And one of my favorite cartoonists for The New Yorker. And it turns out that when I was at the Evergreen State College in 1977, one of his daughters was a fellow student. So I just made that connection. Right? So, but if you go and you search for fence diagram and look for images, you'll find that there are hundreds of different images here. And I wanted to stay away from any copyright claims that people might have on a particular image. Right? The other thing that I wanted to say is that from the framing for the rest of this, the GEI, the Gender Equity Index, is a free online diagnostic tool. It is not a certification. That will become important. Now, this next section, notes and qualifications, I added this morning. Right? I went back and did some additional fact checking on what it is that I had published yesterday to clarify the 3,000 words or so, which are down below this. Again, I'm not going to go into them right now, right? But I did want to say that there were some things which appeared to be unclear, and I wanted to clarify them. So I wanted to add some notes and some qualifications about them. I want to give a quick shout out to Jennifer Feldman, who's connecting from LinkedIn. Jennifer, thanks for the comment. It's interesting. I would like to know what aspect, what aspects of this do you find interesting? I'm not going to go to LinkedIn right now and find out what your background is, but if you're in the coffee sector, if you're in the cocoa sector, you are involved professionally in gender equity exercises, please let me know. Right? And I will get it up on screen because I would like to know what about this you find particularly, what it is you find out about this about interesting. So let's go back to the Equal Origins homepage, right? And I'm going to start off on the homepage the way I started off with things like the chocolate scorecard or Tony's Chocolate Only or Uncommon Cacao or anybody. So the first thing I notice is way in the upper right-hand corner, there's a button that says register login. And so one of my first things is, right, is there a privacy policy? I go down or terms of service. And the answer is on the website, there is no privacy policy or terms of service linked to. Now, Equal Origins is headquartered in the United States. Law says there should at least be a DMCA policy notice. And probably they want to have they do want to have a terms of service and or privacy policy linked to on the homepage. I reached out to the CEO, Kimberly Eason. She sent me their privacy policy as a terms of service as a PDF. And my reading of it is that it doesn't cover one of the questions that I was asked, which is if we go to the R Tools page, I'm going to go there now. There is the ability to try the demo version of the Gender Equity Index. So what you're doing is you are signing up and giving Equal Origins information, but you have no idea what permissions you're giving them. Do they have the right to share this information among all their partners? You don't know. Can they aggregate it and use your name, right? Or anonymize it? You have no idea. And there also no, here's the link to the terms and conditions. Yay. Absolutely important. So I'm mistaken to some point. There is there. I would like to see them on the homepage, just generally because I think it's more transparent. But it is nice that there is a terms and conditions. I did not fully realize that before I got there. So props to doing this. Would be interested in knowing how many people actually read this before they sign what's going on, right? So, and it's an 11-page document. So again, I'm being very careful because I wasn't paying close enough attention to this. But the PDF is available. It wouldn't have occurred to me to go and look for it unless I was going to sign up for the demo. But it is also important to understand that in my reading of it, the terms and conditions, it doesn't actually answer the question of, for example, I want you, Equal Origins, to delete all information about me from your database and never use any of that information in the future. That's not covered in here in my reading of it. So again, just understand what your rights are. Really, really important, I think, in terms of understanding what it is that's going on. I do have to give props for this, right? Which is there is a link here to financial information to a page. And what they've done is here are the federal 990. So if you're a nonprofit organization, you are required to file some information with the federal government about your finances. The fact that they give you the federal 990 forms on the website, you don't have to go to an organization like GuardStar or some other group which you have to pay money for in order to get access to this information. Just props. I mean, this is a great, more visibility than most other organizations give. So props to that, and having access to the terms and conditions is really important, although I would like to see the terms and conditions being listed in the navigation in the footer on the page. Financial is information there. Terms of service privacy is at the same level, in my opinion, in terms of understanding what's going on. Just from it takes 30 sequends. And it provides some visibility to something which is really important, because I would have read them if I saw the link here. It would have been available. So it's my personal approach to this. But what I do want to do is I want to go to the homepage, and then I want to go back to this idea about equality and equity because I think it's important. So here's claims that are being made by Equal Origins. Women are the backbone of global agriculture. They comprise 43% of the agricultural workforce across 570 million farms worldwide. So I think the backbone, I can equivocate with that. 43%, right? They are certainly an important part of the agriculture workforce, but they are not the majority of the workforce. As an editor, I'm going to quibble with it. It's not a huge thing. Right? Yet, despite their critical contributions, women labor often goes unrecognized and undercompensated. And I would say this is where they're soft pedaling. I mean, it rarely goes recognized. Women's labor rarely goes recognized and is more often than not, it is undercompensated. So overselling, underselling in that same sentence. So as a result, systemic gender bias hinders the success of supply chain products, leading to low adoption rates and reduced impact. So there's a lack of specificity about supply chain projects. So are they talking about, geomapping from EUDR, traceability programs, transparency programs, all sorts of programs? I think there's a lack of specificity there, right? Which we could, I could equivocate with. Right? Why is that? Well, I believe that recognizing the importance of gender differences is something that should be done. I don't necessarily know that gender equity is on its own, separate and apart from many other things, is the best tool to be able to achieve the goals that I think Equal Origins is moving toward. This is a question you need to ask yourself. I'm bringing it up. You need to ask yourself, is gender equity where the focus of our efforts should be? The focus of your efforts should be. Gender equity, I believe, is important, but it's a part of a much larger set of questions that need to be asked. Right? And if we address a gender equity issue today, what does that mean in terms of structural adoption 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now? Where do we get there? Right? And just questions that I'm asking you to consider. Right? So why that becomes important is down here, is that Equal Origins vision. We envision a world where women in agriculture have equal access to resources, opportunity, and decision-making power. And this is where we get into the definitional difference of what is equality, what is equal, and what is equity, right? So equal access to these things does not necessarily mean equitable access to things. Maybe we need to make sure that women have greater access to certain things than men currently do, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to redress a long-term ongoing issue that needs to be addressed. So it's not necessarily just equality we're here, although that does, right, point to this is equal, that's in the name, Equal Origins. That's what their vision is, right? But it doesn't actually address the gender equity, the equitable aspect of that thing. And so just want to point this out on the home page, right? That I'm looking at this, right? I understand why they're saying the things that they're saying. But you, as a potential supporter of this, need to go, is this what it is that I believe? Right? I have my own take on it, right? I am suggesting some things that you may want to incorporate into your take. You are free to ignore me. Absolutely. You may say, Clay, that doesn't make any sense. Clay, you're just biased. You're a man. You shouldn't have any stake in this. All legitimate criticisms, by the way. All of those things are legitimate criticisms. I do have a bias. I've stated it already in other programs that I've gone into, which is, and I'll click onto this, right? So I believe that many forms of social certification, It's important to know that the Gender Equity Index is not a certification. So I'm not lumping equal origins into that category. But I believe that many forms of social certifications, I believe that fair trade is one of those forms, fellow fair trade specifically, is a form of socially acceptable economic imperialism, in the sense that it's a group of people, and I'm going to use loaded terminology I don't like, but I'm going to make the point. It's a group of people in the global north telling groups of people in the global south what's fair. They're saying, we want you to adopt a set of morals, a framework that we've developed. We want you to pay for the privilege of adopting a set of morals, but we're not going to guarantee that when you achieve your certification, we're not going to guarantee to purchase from you everything you grow under that certification banner. I'm talking specifically about agricultural products, cocoa in particular, which means that you are out there in the marketplace trying to sell your cocoa. We're not going to buy it and then try to resell it. Which means that if you are unsuccessful in being able to sell all your cocoa as certified, you have to sell some of your cocoa as conventional. What it means is that you're bearing the cost of the certification process. And I don't think that's right. My personal opinion. You can agree with me or not. My personal opinion, that is my bias. I'm upfront about it, and I state it all over the place. And it does inform the way I look at things. It is important to me, right, in terms of my understanding, my framing, how I report on things, that people know that this is where I'm coming from. And so when I look at something like this website, and let's go to the top of this document. When I look at this, this is how I am going to go and take a look at things. So what we have here, I'm showing you, is the PDF of a document called A Decade of Progress, Strengthening Families, Communities, and Supply Chains. So this is a 10-year retrospective, and it is a report that Equal Origins produced about what it is that they've done. And so at the top of the episode, when I said, hey, I've written a report, I've written like 3,000 words, the source for everything that I wrote, most of what it is that I wrote, it's a lot of stuff. The source for what is from the Decade of Progress document. And documents which are referenced as documents. So I just wanted to let you know that that's where I get this. So coming back to this, what I wanted to do is I wanted to very, very specifically talk about some pages. And the first thing I wanted to do was to talk about the partner pages, because in the email that was sent to me, say, hey, Clay, it looks like this was organized by the coffee community, not so much the chocolate community. And it turns out that if you look at these, who is on this list, it turns out to be very, very true. It's very, very coffee heavy. There's not a whole lot of chocolate that's going on here. So we have major supporters and strategic partners as a section. We have research partners for a project called The Way Forward. There's a virtual learning journey project, which has these supporters. There are some seed investors. There are investors in the Gender Equity Index, another project called Better Together, special allies. My personal opinion, Tony uses the word special friends. So I look at special allies, and it's not a term that I would use in that particular respect, just because of the way special is used by Tony. But what I do want to do is point out here that, for example, the Better Together project has got Ecom and Sukafina that's listed here. Ecom is also listed as a GEI investor. Lavazza is listed here in the virtual learning support. And then Lavazza is different from the Lavazza Foundation. Sukafina is listed, a bunch of other places like that. Why is this important? And it turns out that one of the reasons why it's important, right, is that you want to go take a look at the institutional affiliations and the relationships. So, for example, if we go back to this, what we do is we find here under virtual learning journey supporters, we have Cacao Latitudes. Cacao Latitudes is a subsidiary of Ecom. Right? We see that Go is also listed here, right? But they're owned by a Japanese company called Glico. Starbucks is listed here, but there is a project, the Cooperativa 20 de Abril, the 20th of April Cooperative. There is a case study which is produced by them, which is produced in part, funded in part by the Starbucks Foundation. So it's really important to understand what some of these relationships are, because when you collapse them, it turns out that it's a much smaller group of people, a much smaller group of entities that are a part of this. And that most of them are, in fact, from the coffee space, not from the cocoa space. But for example, Econ, right, appears 4 times on the page if you think about Cacao Latitudes, right? Go is owned by Izaki Glico, right? Now, why do we care about that? It says that big chocolate present on the page is Mars. And it turns out that's only true if you do not include corporate parentage. So for example, Glico is in the top 10 and maybe the top 5 largest chocolate companies, confectionery snack companies in the world. And so I would consider it to be technically within the context of big chocolate, even though Cho is listed. And that same relationship is presented here, down here. So Allegro Coffee is owned by Whole Foods, which is owned by Amazon. Interesting to know. Green Mountain Coffee is owned by Keurig Dr. Pepper. Dunkin' is owned by Roar Capital. J.M. Smucker holds the Detail Retail Package coffee license. So both appear as independent partners while sitting on opposite ends of one commercial relationship. Now, this is interesting to me because for a very long time, one of the things that I've been interested in is this set of relationships. So for example, when we think about Tony's Chocolonely, it's impossible for me to separate Tony's from its relationship with Barry Callebaut. Barry Callebaut manufactures the cocoa butter and manufactures the base chocolate that are in all Tony's Chocolonely products. If you are going to say that Tony Chocolonely is good, just in the broad spectrum of things, or better than other actors in the chocolate sector, you have to ask yourself, well, what does that mean when their entire business is dependent on Barry Callebaut, and Barry Callebaut is inarguably not a good actor in the same respect that Tony's is considered to be a good actor? So understanding these parental relationships, these corporate relationships is really important, right? And they're not represented here. And with all, I would not really expect them to be here, because they're different aspects of the same organization are involved in different ways with the same organization. But it takes like very, very specific insider knowledge to understand that Cacao Latitudes is a part of Ecom and that Cho is Glico, which is not listed here. And Lavazza, it makes sense that they're the same thing as the Lavazza Foundation, right? But Starbucks and Starbucks Foundation are not the same thing, although one is owned by the other. One is an arm of the other. I don't know what the ownership is. But that's really, really important. But it also comes important when we look at a cited source. So there is a National Coffee Association. There's an article which was written by Kimberly Eason, who is the CEO of Equal Origins, and which she has a list of companies that are on the GEI investor list. And that list is different from this 9, which is interesting to understand. Now, That other article was years ago. It was written out of the context here. I found it as a result of my fact checking. Is it material? Maybe not. But it just goes to show how difficult putting together reports like this, how difficult it is to be consistent with what it is that you're saying. And that's the point. And it requires, number one, somebody who's got the interest and the time to do this kind of fact checking. And it does require a bit of institutional knowledge in order to be able to figure it out, to understand where to start. And one of the things that I really did bust the chocolate scorecard on was that they didn't provide any links. This is a PDF document. Okay? There are some things that are really hard to pull apart here. So there's an entry for something called theobroma in here, and it's just such a generic term that trying to figure out which theobroma they're talking about is really, really difficult to do, right? So what I would like to suggest is that Equal Origins update this document and just make every one of these things into a URL so that we can figure out what they're talking about. So Feta Cacao might be in the Colombian Cacao Growers Federation. There's a Colombian Coffee Growers Association, which are very, very different, right? Theobroma, single origin, that's a generic term. You wouldn't be able to find out who single origin is as a seed investor. This is the government of Reunion Island, or is it a company named Reunion Island? It's important because we want to know, where is the source of funding come from? And is the IDB here the International Development Bank? I'm going to guess it is. I'm not entirely sure, right? But you spent, I don't know how long, producing a report for 10 years. And by the way, this document is aimed squarely at funders. And it's really important to understand that this is designed to, number one, reassure the people who have given them a lot of money that their money is being spent well. In my opinion, this document is aimed squarely at funders. This is to give funders reassurance that their money is being used well, and to encourage other funders that, hey, you're joining a great group of people. Okay? You want to be a part of this group, which is working to address this problem. I get it, I understand it. But, Mars Drinks, this is an interesting little bit of corporate relationships. Is Mars Drinks was acquired by Lavazza in 2018 and is now Lavazza Professional. So Mars Drinks and Lavazza appear on the same page as separate partners, but Mars Drinks is now a division of Lavazza. And of course, behind Mars Drinks originally is Mars Incorporated, one of the largest companies on Earth. And I believe that Mars Drinks is an equipment company. And so there are some equipment companies that are here, which are different from cooperatives, which are different from individual companies, which are different from, right? And those kinds of distinctions are not put together. So Activoca is an NGO. I've seen their work in Latin America in cocoa. Equal Exchange is a company that I've talked about on the ChocolateLife in the past. Cascade is a general on, again, it's just a general term. I don't know who they are. Lush is the cosmetics company, maybe, right? So you get the idea. We have a whole lot of names here, but we have zero context for these names, how they fit in, where they are. I'm going to guess it turns out that about 60 to 65% of the companies on this page have no connection to cocoa at all. Many of the companies that overlaps, obviously Ecom is one that has overlaps in coffee and cocoa. Some of them are more cocoa than coffee, but it's very, very difficult to pull out the relationships. That's one of the things I was able to do. If you'd like me to post that table, I can post the table, right? I didn't do it, but it was interesting to me as part of my fact checking to try to figure this out. So we have the Global Equity Index investors. So who's involved in it? Lutheran World Relief. Here's an interesting thing that it became very hard. Caravella, okay, is primarily associated with the country of Colombia and Latin America more generally. However, one of the things which is interesting about them is that they're actually headquartered in London. And it turns out it took me a while to verify that. I wanted to figure out where are all these companies located, because it turns out to be an important point, and I'll get to that important point later. Right? So here's Caravella, and it turns out that they are in the UK. But all of these companies here, and this is why it's important, all of these companies here are headquartered in consuming countries. So Lavazza is in Switzerland, Berryhouse Roasters is in the US and the UK, Ecom is in Switzerland, LWR is in the US, Caravella is in the UK. None of these companies has their global headquarters in either a coffee or cocoa producing country, which turns out to be fairly important in an observation that I'm going to make later. There's another page where I think this becomes important. And this is a page where we list the board members of Equal Origins, the core consultants of Equal Origins, the industry advisory group, the gender experts panel for the Gender Equity Index. And it turns out that, here's Kimberly Eason, right? That makes sense. She's the CEO, she's a staff. From the financial reporting that's being done, I think she's the only paid staff member, the only one who appears to be drawing a salary from the organization. Interesting thing to know. Thank you for publishing the financials, your 990s. But the only person that I recognize here off the top of my head is Anna Lavin. I've known Anna for well over a decade. If anybody's been to CHOCOA, she is now a member of the company that runs CHOCOA in Amsterdam Cocoa Week, Amsterdam Chocolate Week. She used to be on the staff. She's now an associate at KIT, which is the Royal Tropical Institute. She is the chairperson now of the Chocolonely Foundation. She was a member, but she's been elevated to the chair. So there's an institutional relationship there with Tony's Chocolonely, which is not listed anywhere up here. But the fact is that I have no idea who any of these other people here and why they deserve to be here. I've tried to do this before. I can go to LinkedIn and try to find these people, but there are a lot of people here on the list. And so, Kimberly, if you're watching this, or the staff or the group of people who are responsible for putting this together, link to some sort of bio of these people. I mean, it would be really, really helpful to understand what it is that's going on. I want to understand, for example, institutional biases. This is where, right, we can figure out how many of these people might be on the payroll of any of the people who are up here. Now, that turned out to be the case in the chocolate scorecard. There was an institutional supporter, a non-governmental organization, a nonprofit, and one of the people on one of the advisory panels was a staff member, was an employee of one of the companies. I'm not saying that there is a conflict of interest. I'm just saying that the relationships need to be disclosed, or just as a matter of transparency and visibility. There is one thing I do want to say, because it's really, really important, and it's going to be a larger issue that I pointed out in what it is that I wrote, but is really difficult to tease out here, is that when Anna Lavin was at KIT, she was one of the lead researchers on a project called Demystifying the Cocoa Sector in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. And one of the things I have been impressed about is that KIT open sourced all of the underlying data. So it was published online, I believe the repositories at Harvard, but you can go take a look at the underlying data set, and I believe you can download it. And if you wanted to put it into some sort of data discovery tool, you'd be able to run your own analysis of what it is that they're going, what it is that they discovered. You'd be able to say, given the same data set and perhaps a slightly different set of assumptions, I've got a different set of questions that I want to ask. Does the data set support these questions? And one of the great things about what it is that Kit did by open sourcing the data set is I can do that, right? One of the things that we do not know about the gender equity index is that you've got the information and what is it? What is it? What is it? We don't know anything about the tools that are used to analyze it. But one of the things that we don't see when we go to the Equal Origins website and we think about our tools is that we don't see anything here which says, oh, people have given us all this information. Something like 350 companies have completed the gender equity index, right? We don't know what they said, right? And we don't have the underlying data itself, which could be anonymized to some extent, but we don't have any way of knowing what the data actually say, right? Because there's no way to independently review what's going on. And another thing that I would suggest for Equal Origins would be to find a way to open source some or all of the data set. There might be a way to anonymize it. You can go to the entities that have filled it out and say, do we have your permission to go and do this, right? But it would be, I wouldn't need to know that, I wouldn't name the farm or name the company. I would be able to say a farm in Ghana, right, in this province, or so we'd be able to get with X number of people. So it would be easy enough to do. Well, no, it's going to be hard to do. I'm not going to try to undersell how much work it is to do, but it's really a challenge to be able to understand the actual impact of what it is that's going on. Right? What we have to do is we have to trust, and I'm not saying we shouldn't trust, but this is always a trust but verify thing. So we do not have an independent third party who's taking a look what it is that's going on and saying, yes, this in fact accurately and completely represents what's going on. Why is this all important? Right? Because it turns out that I think there is a hidden, whoops, that's not what you want to see, that's the back end. I think that there is a hidden challenge that we need to go take a look at all the way down to the bottom, right? Right. So all of this analysis, right? All of this analysis, right? Right. And one of the things that we find out, and I'm gonna try to, I'm looking for it in the background, which is why I haven't switched over to the screen, but I'm going to switch over there now. Is all right, buried in the Sucafina case study, which is linked to which is part of the Decade report, in a short list of what the company is thinking about next, okay, is that Sucafina is considering how to use the gender equity index with other supply chain partners. Okay? And one of the things they're looking to do is to explore the potential of using gender equity index scores as a KPI, a key performance index, right, for lending. Right? This is a problem. This is a problem. You have to take the GEI. You need to get a certain score on the GEI, right? And if we're going to use your score on the GEI to determine if we're going to give you money, right? And what has happened is a non-certification, which is voluntary, right, has the potential become coercive, right? Right? Meet our gender equity index minimums, right? Or we don't give you money. And what can of worms does that open up? Now, it's really, really important to step back and say, this is just Sucafina, I say this, Sucafina thinking out loud. Right? This is not Equal Origins proposing anything. And like I said with what I said about Kit, open sourcing the demystifying the cocoa sector in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire data set, right? EEO published this thought in its own case study, right, rather than leaving it out. right? So they're not trying to hide this, right? They're not distancing from it. They're not endorsing it, right? That's the thing that's really important. This is just Sucafina speaking out loud, and EO not endorsing it, but passing it on. I think that what they should do is they should push back and say, no, this is not an appropriate use of the GEI. This is not an appropriate use of the GI. I think it's a slippery slope, and if they go down that way, it's an instrument for everybody who has invested in the GEI to start leveraging that imbalance of power that they have, right, unethically. It's a slippery slope we need to back away from right now. And so I say it's not a wild leap. The Sucafina and Econ case studies both note the companies already provide financing as a core service. Right? So Sucafina says including financing, risk management, and quality control. And Econ says financing, agriculture support, and quality enhancement. Right? So this lending relationship pre-exists the gender equity index. Right? But as I say, game this out with me. What happens when trade finance is contingent on a GEI score? Get an 80 or above, we'll finance you. Right? Get a 60 to 70, we'll finance you at 40%. Get below a 60, you're not eligible for any money or something. This is speculation on my part. It's hypothetical. I'm not saying that this is what's going on. Right? But what happens? Right? Will a co-op that took the GEI amend its statutes because it needs working capital? So I need to make sure that I get a GEI score. I'm going to change my governance rules in order to be able to get there. So both roads, independent and contingent, produce an identical row in the data. You've amended your statutes, right? But right, organizational measurements can't distinguish conviction from compliance. And it may seem out of context here, this distinction between conviction and compliance, but it's actually talked about up front. We do talk about getting from conviction to compliance. And so if you're interested in this, it's not a super long read. It's 15 minutes. So yeah, maybe it is a super long read, right? But I think it will get there. You'll understand what it is that I mean about the difference between conviction and compliance and what that means when it comes to amending its statutes. Am I a cooperative amending my statutes because I am convinced, I'm convicted, that this is the right thing to do? This is a moral thing to do. It is ethically justified that I do these things because by including women in the ways that we discuss, it is going to be better for everyone. It's also important to understand that this gender-linked credit designed for the bottom up by the co-op itself, right? The gender-linked credit facility is not the main concern. Who writes the criteria is my main concern. So this 20 Cooperativa 20 de Abril is the case study was funded by the Starbucks Foundation. Their own plan includes a financing service for vulnerable women. But what happens when gender-linked credit, which comes from a program which is designed by the cooperative itself, what happens when credit worthiness is determined in part by the GEI score, right? And that's what's really, really important here, right? So there's one other point that I want to make. Let me get to this, right? Right? And that is that I want to make this point. So we talked about what the criteria are, right? And how the criteria are generated. Notice that if we go take a look, which companies funded the Gender Equity Index: Lavazza, Poly, Garella, Berry House, Jot, Efico, Ecom, LWR, Lutheran World Relief, MOCA, Maximizing Opportunities for Coffee and Cocoa in the Americas, Women Forward International. So those are organizations. Okay? So it's important to understand where they're located. Because as I point here, the criteria, what the gender equity, the questions they ask, that they think they're important, but you can only measure what it is that you ask. And by the way, again, something that I wanted to say earlier that I didn't, Equal Origins didn't come up with this framework on their own. It grew out of a framework which was put together by the IFPRI, which is the International Food Policy Research Institute. So props to them, not from starting at ground zero, but to taking an existing framework and modifying it for this particular requirement. Right? But the point being is that the criteria are always set where the capital is. Right? So Ecom is in Switzerland, headquartered, global headquarters in Switzerland. Lavazza is in Italy. Berry House is in the United States. Allegro, which goes up to Whole Foods, which goes up to Amazon, in the United States. The Poly Group is in Finland. Caravella Limited is in the UK, even though they're very closely identified with Colombia and Latin America. And more generally, their corporate headquarters are in London. So Efico is in Belgium. Jot is in the US. Lutheran World Relief is headquartered in the United States. 4C, now it turns out that 4C is now is a different, named differently, but 4C is in the original documents, right? Between them, they put up 127,000 in 2021 to fund the development of the GEI. However, their own published account, there is a link, which I put in this, to an article which was written by Kimberly Eason in the National Coffee Association publication a couple of years ago, in which she recounts this capital group, right? And it's different. I think there are 11, if I recall correctly, there are 11 people in that list. There are only 9 people in this list. Again, 4C represents one version and not the other, because I was confused about what to call everybody else. So let's go take a look. It may be that 4C is now Women Forward International or some other organization. I'm not entirely sure. It's complicated, right, to keep track of these things. And I know that I have the answer, but I'm just forgetting it right here, right? The final point that I want to make here, not the final point that I want to make here, but I want to make on this topic, is that this structure about what I call the certification industrial complex, even though GEI is not a certification, it's a voluntary tool which can give you some guidance about how your organization compares against framework. Right? So, right, which is this certification industrial complex. This idea, the criteria set where the capital is the certification industrial complex. The producing country, consuming country. I prefer producing and consuming country. Colombia is a country where cocoa is produced and coffee is produced, although they do consume quite a bit of that. Okay? A consuming country is a company like Switzerland. They don't grow coffee. They don't grow cocoa. I like producing and consuming because there's no judgment associated with that. And that's different from global north, global south. There's a value judgment there. Developed country, developing country. There's a value judgment there. First and third world, there are value judgments there. I want to encourage everybody. I'm not saying that Equal Origins used any of that framing. I didn't look for it in the decade report, but I just want to say I think it's important to do that. Right? So the producing country, consuming country isn't just more polite. It names the right axis. Who writes the standards versus who is measured against them? Okay? So it turns out it's the cocoa cooperative, the coffee cooperative that is measured against the standards. And that's different from, Lavazza, how they are measured against the standards. And I would love to see a list, because it's not published, about who the organizations are that actually took it. They list 350, I believe. We don't know who they are. And I think that's a shortcoming. So, right. So in closing, right? So Equal Origin makes moral claims, ethical claims, and prudential claims in a single sentence. This will make more sense if you read the entire article. That lets each one retreat behind the others when pressed. Right? So the two instruments, the GEI, the GALS, again, I'm right at an hour, so I want to be careful about this. The split along that seams, right? That produces conviction, but only the compliance instruments scales. So GEI is something you can take online. It's a fill in the check mark box. GALS is you gather a group of people together, families together, hopefully couples, and you go through a multi-day intensive in-person experience. That's really, really hard to scale. If you're working with 25 to 40 people at a time, and you're working with what they say 500 million farmers, or 500,000 in cocoa, at least and what they're doing. It takes a long, long time, and it doesn't scale. Scales is the GEI. We need to understand that's what's going on. So we're focusing on compliance with the checkbox, not am I convinced that this is the right thing to do. So it's also important to understand that in the Decade of Progress report, there are no ROI numbers. They're saying we are moving towards doing this. And again, there's a much more in-depth explanation. We plan to do this. We've done this. We're going to do this. We want to do that, right? But there are no numbers. They claim, and this is where this claim, the moral claim, ethical claim, and prudential claim, it's the right thing to do, right? But they're saying that organizations who go through this GEI process make more money. There's more income to women, there's more income to families. But at no place anywhere in the Decade report is this quantified. Is it $10 a month more? Is it $1,000 a year more? Right? Is it equal? Is it the same? Right? Depending upon what country you're in. Do you get the same benefit in Ethiopia as you do in Colombia in the coffee sector? None of that is documented anywhere here, right? And none of it is connected causally to gender responsive service provisions. And so it could be a correlation. Is it a causation? I don't know how you tease that out, but there's nothing there. But if the business case is real, right? That's one thing. If the business case is not real, then the diagnostic score, which is the number you get when you fill out the GEI, gating capital is a moral view enforced through market power. And that's a thing that we want to avoid, right? And nobody can say which, because there are no ROI investment figures anywhere, ROI figures anywhere in the 28 pages of the Decade report. Again, aimed squarely at business funders, but they're not making the business case, in my opinion. I look at it and I go, right, the 500 people the 500 organizations that took the GEI and scored high, each of them earned $10,000 a year more, right? And they split it among 400 members, and everybody's happy, right? None of that is being done. So the measurement gap is the only thing standing between a coordination device and an imposition. Right? An equal origin is scaling toward the mandate before closing the gap. So how do we use the GEI? And the equal origin attribution here may be a challenge, because it could be Sucafina Ecom people who are funding this rather than equal origin itself. But it appears to be that equal origin is the entire effort, is scaling towards the mandate, get a score on the GEI, and we can finance you before closing the membership gap, right? Which lands us back on my own definition. Ethical sourcing means a relationship in which one trading partner does not take unfair advantage of a power imbalance. A GEI score used as a lending KPI is a trading partner using a power imbalance to coerce conduct from a weaker one. Now, getting to the business case, finding the return on investment, and being able to not just correlate it, but say, right, the implementation of these gender equity plans, right, was the thing that directly led to the increase in income or the improvements in outcome more generally, right, is going to be a challenging one to tease out. Because it could be a correlation having to do with, the price of cocoa went up 40% or 100% last month. There could be all sorts of things that are connected to it. And so we need to understand it. But by my definition, using a GAI score as a lending key performance indicator, right? So get a good GEI score. We're not going to give you financing, or we're going to change the terms of the financing based on your GEI score. So if you got a higher score, lower interest, right? Better repayment terms, 3 years, 5 years rather than 2 years, right? Using the GEI score that way, I think is a bad idea. And so if you're Sukafina, if you're Ecom, if you're Equal Origins, just say no. Just say no right now. Just commit to no. We are not going to use GEI as a metric for determining financing. You're providing the financing now without it. Just continue to do that. Please, please, please. All right. Just do not go down that road because, in my opinion, you will be completely undermining all the work the GEI is supposed to do by making it coercive rather than cooperative, convicted, based out of conviction. So it's really, really important that you stay away with it. And then finally, I just wanted to have fun with this. I mentioned, at the top, I didn't mention it at the top, but I showed the fence cartoon, which I had rendered Gemini to render the cartoon. I gave it examples of the cartoon, and I said render a version in the style of Charles Barsotti. And I mentioned that I've been a huge fan of Charles for quite some time as an illustrator in the New Yorker magazine. And one of his daughters was a classmate of mine when I was at the Evergreen State College in the late 1970s. When I got to the end, I said, I had another classmate who was at the Evergreen State College. Her name is Linda Berry. I'm a huge fan of her and her work, and have been since I took a class with her back in 1977 now. And so I asked Gemini to re-render the fence image in the style of one of Linda's comic book characters, Ernie Pook. This is the what it is that came up with. And I asked it also to think about what the original image, the featured image at the top of the page. I'll go back to it. But I thought that this was a fun way to end today's program. Would be to podcast was to have another image and to just give a call out to another favorite cartoonist. And I chose two that I have some sort of connection to. And this is the featured image at the top of the posts. All right. So we're talking about equality, equity, and equal origins gender equity index. The image, the text on the sign says equal rights does not mean less rights for you. It's not a pie. And this is a challenge that I think many of us is that we think of these things as zero-sum games. And we see this playing out in politics all over the world. And I think that it's something when it comes to important concepts like gender equity. I think it's really important that what we do is we step back and recognize that gender equity is an important thing to recognize, important thing to combat, but also realize that the way cocoa farmers in Nigeria think about gender equity is going to be different from the way coffee farmers in Ethiopia think about gender equity. And one of the things that I worry about a checklist in a equity in an index, a diagnostic tool, is the likelihood that we're going to lose those nuances. And in losing those nuances, what we do is we approach the topic from a state of hubris rather than a state of humility. Right? We're up here in a producing country, and we know better than you do. And what we should be doing is saying, "Oh, here is what we need from a bottom up." If you're going to have, a gender-linked credit facility, let it come out of what it is that the cooperative needs, right? Rather than what some people in a boardroom in Switzerland or the United States or someone else, what it is that they think. So I am really interested. I want people to go and do a deep dive. I mean, there are almost 4,000 words. Only covered a very, very small percentage of them today. Not a whole lot of verbatim reading of what's on the post. but I encourage you to read it. If you are a Chocolate Life member and you're logged in, you can comment down on the bottom of the post and you can say, hey, Clay, I think you're wrong. Hey, Clay, I think you're right. If you're on LinkedIn, right, at any point, you can go to the post for today's episode and you will find the link right here. This will, I mean, I'm not going to go there because we'll get a recursion, an image within an image within an image. But you can go to LinkedIn and you can comment on LinkedIn. You can go to Facebook and you can comment on Facebook. If you want to go to YouTube, you can comment on YouTube. I will go see all of these comments and I will reply to them. Right? I'd like you to do it on the Chocolate Life, number one, because I want to increase the membership on the Chocolate Life. But it provides a way for me to engage in the context of the entire post, which I think is really, really important. And with that, I want to say thanks to Jennifer Feldman for her comment on today's post. For the people who liked and subscribed, watched all the way through to the end, thank you very much. Today is Friday, the 24th of July, so we have one more Friday episode of Pod Save Chocolate. But stay tuned at 11:30. So in 19 minutes, I'm going to be back here. And if you are a member of the Chocolate Life, I have a 90-minute members AMA call. So I will be here. You can come in and you can ask me any question about anything as long as it's about chocolate or cocoa. You got a business question? You can ask me about that. You want to ask me about today's episode? You can ask me about that. Right? But you do have to be a member to be able to get to the link, which is on the July member newsletter, which is on the homepage of the Chocolate Life. Let me show you that. So we're going to go to the homepage. Sorry about the weird navigation, but I've zoomed it up. So here is the July member newsletter. I'm not logged in this browser. Oh, I am logged in this browser. Right? And so if you log in, you can click on the link to join the call, which starts in about 18 minutes. Give me enough time to get something to drink, calm my throat, and get ready for the rest of the morning. But until then, everybody, remember, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you just might be doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.